About an hour into my first playthrough, I realised I was playing as a party of 3 that had around 2.5 brain cells between them, one of which was also amnesiac, the other 2 had talking swords, one was addicted to making money for seemingly completely selfish reasons, and one had chronic narcolepsy. This is when I knew I was in for the time of my life. Tales of Destiny is a complete package, an RPG with satisfying combat, an intriguing story, and genuinely really good characters, although there are definitely those that are left by the wayside. So join me on this look through this game. We'll look at each aspect of the journey and collect our thoughts throughout. We'll be looking at the PS2 Director's Cut edition here, and be aware that there will be spoilers throughout, but I will mention later when we get to the really spoilery stuff. And since this port was never released in the West, I'm using the translation patch from Life Battle Productions, so thank you to them for their hard work. Thank you for doing the Lord's work, truly. I think there's been a new patch since I've recorded this footage, so if anything is different from what you've seen yourself, then that's probably why. And without further ado, let's dive right into Tales of Destiny. I would die for most of these people, but not Kongman. The game opens with our protagonist, Stan Aileron, getting caught hiding on the Lumina Draconis, and a live dragon that acts as an airship for one of this world's countries, Seingald. Why is this dragon alive, you may ask? What purpose do they need it to be an actual dragon for? It's cool, that's why, no further questions. In all seriousness though, that's one of those things that's never really explained, and I think that's okay. A world in which the characters understand and know about things they would be expected to understand helps make everything feel more lived in and authentic, in my opinion anyway. Certain games like Final Fantasy X can make player-directed exposition for the purpose of learning about the world work, with a world-travelling protagonist, and that game does that quite well, but not everything needs that level of explanation. Sometimes having the world have just enough context to let the player figure it out is enough. I mean, the answer is that they were all created in an ancient war, but hey, we don't find that out until much later. Anyway, the airship gets attacked by monsters before Stan is pulled in front of a court of law, and since Stan doesn't have a weapon, he hides himself in the cargo hold, where Deimos is lying in wait. Deimos is a Swordian, one of 6 ancient beings that are essentially human souls embedded into a sword, one for each element. After running past 2 nameless characters who definitely won't be plot relevant later, Stan escapes to Draconis, leading into one of my favourite cutscenes in the game.
える。我が名は、お前の名はリブロン。おい、スタン、しっかりしろ、スタン。
Stan then learns he's the new master of Deimos, since only certain people are able to hear the voices of Swordians. Whether Deimos actually wants Stan to be his master is left up to interpretation, but for the meantime they're stuck with each other. After helping the kind Woodrow, who definitely knows more than he lets on, and Chelsea, this little child that's running around Antarctica in a crop top, Stan tries to return home before running into Miri and Ruti, the two people from on board the Draconis.
はて、どこかで見た顔のような。あんたは。お前は。なんだ、二人は知り合いか?
Ruti is the wielder of Atwhite, the Water Swordian, and Miri is a non-master. This leads to certain scenes where Stan, Ruti, Deimos and Atwhite are having a conversation, and Miri is just standing there, missing half of the conversation. Anyway, they try to sell some ancient treasure to a shady guy, and are apprehended by the Seingald military and Leon Magnus, the wielder of Shaltier, the Swordian of Earth. This leads to the party going to Seingald and being involved in a plot to steal the world's most powerful artifact, the Eye of Adamoni, where the party will meet up with many different people and cultures, and some that I would rather not have met. The first arc of the plot leading into a world tour in which we get closer and closer to the antagonist, Greybun, every time before he escapes right in front of our eyes, can be frustrating at times, since after the first couple of areas you realise there's a couple of locations on the world map we haven't visited yet, so we can't possibly get him and he's going to get away again. But it's still satisfying to travel around, since the majority of locations are completely different. You've got Fandaria, the frozen wastelands, Calvalis, the desert lands, Aquavale, the aquatic Asian-inspired land, Seingald, the green lush area, and Fitzgald, which is just Seingald again. Each location is visually distinct. You could show me a shot of any town and I'd probably be able to tell you where it was from. My only issue is with the dungeons. A lot of these places are just a lot of corridors linked together. It's particularly obvious in places like the Fandaria Wilds or inside the Strelized Temple, although at least it has a few larger rooms and set pieces. I assume this is a consequence of the transition of the areas from PS1 to PS2, but honestly the other areas definitely make up for it. The only actual location I can think of that I actively disliked was Trash Mountain towards the end of the game. It's a poisonous maze, and to complete it you have to clear the area of these mounds creating the poison, but you have no idea how many there are or where they are, and I missed one for ages, leading to a lot of wandering around. Plus you have to use these neutralizer items in order to not die from the fumes, but from what I could tell there's no indication of when to use them or what they're actually preventing, so a bit more guidance would have been nice, but considering this is my main complaint, that speaks wonders for the other areas. At least Philly agrees with me about this place, since she goes insane in this zone with no explanation and goes back to normal straight away afterwards. And walking around these areas are monsters. Lots of really fun designs for monsters, but some of the enemies here are horrific to look at. Oh my god, can't we kill this thing any faster? The original game had a combat system similar to Tales of Phantasia PS1. See my video on that, see my opinions there. But the PS2 port uses the more modern aerial linear motion battle system, meant to make fighting enemies in the air easier, which, yeah, I guess later on in the game that is true. But at the beginning, oh boy, those flyers are still demons. Rather than TP, there is a CC, or chain capacity system. Each action requires a certain amount of CC, with normal attacks taking 1, while leader arts need higher values. Each character has a minimum and a maximum CC level, determined by their weapons. Right, how do I explain this in a way that makes sense? Anyway, so say Stan has CC levels of 2 to 4. He'll start the battle with 2 CC, then after making an attack, the CC level will increase to 3, then another attack, then it will increase to 4, and then back to 2, then to 3, and so on. Did that make sense? Did you understand? No? Well, that's the best I can do, I'm afraid. It does make sense in game, I swear. The lack of TP means there's a lot less resource management to be done, which means as long as you have the CC, you can cast whatever magic you want. And thankfully, every big magic attack doesn't freeze the action, although this can lead to things becoming a bit overwhelming at times. Many battles towards the end have spell effects every millisecond, and I had little to no idea what was going on at any given time. The battles themselves don't take too long either, and every character has a role to play. You can split party members into 2 types, Swordian Masters and Non-Masters. The Swordian crew are able to use magic as well as their physical arts, with Woodrow having both sword and bow attacks. You can never equip new weapons to these guys, although you can augment their stats using the new Swordian device system, allowing increases in main stats, CC, element absorption, and so on. Now, the Non-Masters. They can't use magic, but they do have many different weapons, and some of them can heal and use elemental arts, but in my experience, not as well. They're also not as customizable as the Masters. In my playthrough, I found myself almost exclusively using the Swordian crew unless I absolutely had to use someone else. Although I can see their uses, like using Johnny for the boss fight in Terrazzi since he uses Sonic skills. Maybe then I wouldn't have done so badly in that fight. At least one non-current party member can be useful though, as each character has a support talent they can use when on the bench, some being more useful than others, like improving accessory ranks, leveling up stat herbs, then some less useful ones such as making that particular character's stats better. Sorry Kongman, you're on the bench for a reason, and it's because I don't like you. Speaking of, the characters are at the heart of this experience. Tales has always been known for its characters above all else, and I truly believe that some of their best character work is in this entry. I'll be talking a little bit more about later story developments in this section and beyond, so if you don't want to get spoiled, maybe drop out now, go play the game yourself, and then pop back in. Our main protagonist is Stan Aileron, and this man has an absolute heart of gold, and absolutely no brain to work alongside it. If I was placed at gunpoint and had to describe a character as having golden retriever energy, I would have to choose him, loyal to a fault with zero thought process. He's also got one of my favourite story gameplay integrations. It's very quickly established that Stan has trouble waking up from his sleep, and this is even written into why his support talent works. And in battle, if he is put to sleep, he will never wake up without using an item, whereas every other character will eventually wake. Which is fun in a sort of meta sense, but can be slightly irritating in actual gameplay. What he lacks in academic knowledge, Stan makes up for in emotional intelligence, as he seems to always know the right thing to say to cheer someone up, as we see several times when he talks to Philia or Ruti. He may bicker with Deimlos, his swordian a lot, but they work well together by the end of the game, and Stan will always follow his moral code no matter what, even when the people he loves do things he completely disagrees with. Honestly, Stan is one of my favourite Tales protagonists. He's funny, he's always right at all times. Honestly, the only one that comes close to him for me is Velvet from Berseria, and that's for completely different reasons. In battle, he mainly uses fire elemental spells and sword attacks, and as the protagonist, he was the character I used the most. There's not really much more to say about him than that, to be honest. He's just my silly little guy, and I love him. Next up we have Ruti Katria, the money-obsessed lens hunter. Oh, what's that? What's a lens? Well, you see, about 1,000 years ago, a meteorite crashed into the Earth, and the fragments of this became what the world calls lens today, with many different types and qualities, which can be used as energy sources or traded for money, with an additional gameplay element of using them to refine and create new equipment, which is a lot more efficient than simply buying it at an equipment shop. And lens hunters are people who raid ancient ruins and temples for treasure and lens to sell for huge profits. Anyway, Ruti is obsessed with money. even trying to steal and sell Deimlos, even though she understands the importance of the Swordians being a master to Atwhite. The truth of the matter is that she needs a lot of money fast so she can save the orphanage she grew up in, and she really cares for these kids and would do anything for them, obviously. A lot of background characters think badly of her because of her job, and also think she's taken advantage of the amnesiac Miri, which couldn't be further from the truth. They're like sisters to each other. There are several scenes in the game where you can see them in the background sat with each other, and even just their body language shows their care for each other. It's amazing. Ruti is also on a quest to find out who her parents are, since obviously she grew up in an orphanage, and this comes to a head at several points during the plot, and the character moments she shares with Stan are my favourite parts in this entire game. The sheer emotion she shows when she breaks down on the Radistral is so intense. Her voice actor, Yuka Imai, does an outstanding job here, as do the rest of the voice cast.
Ruti, ここにいたのか。
チェルシーに悪いことしちゃった。後で謝らないとね。みんなもうんざりしてたでしょ。
そんなことはない。
イライラする。ねえスタン、もっと嫌になることを言ってあげようか。私ね、リオンが死んだのに全然悲しくないの。むしろ腹が立って仕方ないくらい。
ルーティ、
いきなり弟だのなんだの、そんなこと言われたって困るわよ。私にとって家族と言えるのは孤児院にいるチビどもとシスターだけ。リオンもヒューゴも関係ない。あんな奴らどうだっていいのよね。最低でしょ。
いや、
なんでよ。血も涙もない冷血女だって思うでしょ。
思わない。
どうしてよ。私はあんたみたく泣いたりすらしなかったのよ。それがどうして冷血じゃないのよ。
ルーティ、無理しなくていいから。
無理ですって。やめてよ、変な同情するの。冗談じゃないわ。そうか、これってもしかしてあいつの作戦なんじゃない。実はあいつ生きててさ、私たちのこと見て笑ってんの。
ルーティ、
それでいずれひょっこり顔出すのよ。ふんとかふんとか言ってさ。
ルーティ、あの状態で助かるわけがない。ルーティだって分かってるだろ。
だったらどうしろってのよ。ねえ、どうしたらいいのよ。私どうしたらいいの。私あいつのこと大嫌いだったのよ。生意気だし、いつも威張ってたし、それに一緒にいた時間なんてごくわずかだったのに。なのになんでこんなに苦しいのよ。なんでこんなに動揺してるの。ねえスタン、教えてよ。なんでなのねえスタン。
俺頭悪いからこんな時どう言えばいいかわからない。だからせめて一緒に悩もう。あいつのためにも。
ごめん、みっともないとこ見せて。
いいって。
でもおかげで少し吹っ切れたわ。
そっか。
私ヒューゴを止めてみせる。やっぱり親だとは到底思えないけど、身内の不始末であることは確かだしね。こういう個人的な理由で戦うのってダメかな。
そんなことはない。ルーティはそれでいいと思う。
ありがとう。
みんなのところへ戻ろうか。
In battle, Ruthie is both the water elemental damage dealer as well as the healer, and also has some arts that allow her to steal gold, although I never really made use of these or noticed them making a positive contribution to my gold consumption. She was a constant mainstay in the party for me, although the removal of TP does have the side effect that you cannot use healing arts outside of battle, although new healing items have been added that can only be used outside of battle, although they are produced by the evil corporation, so they're probably poisonous or something. Our first non-Swordian Master party member is Miri Argent, the previously mentioned partner to Ruti and resident amnesiac. At the beginning of the game she has intelligence comparable to Stan, but it's my theory that this is directly because of her amnesia, since at the end of the game, once she's regained her memories, she speaks quite profoundly, having some of my favourite lines in the game. However, she still has a tendency to be a little ditzy, is the word I'll use. There are several scenes where important conversations are happening and she'll just wander off screen. Sometimes, like in Neustadt, it's explained, but there's this one scene in Calvalès where she just leaves the room and it's never explained where or why she went. Let's make it clear, I think this is hilarious, and she's one of my favourite characters because of this, as well as that she has a really fleshed out character arc, what with her amnesia at the beginning, figuring out who she is and who she fights for, and continuing her journey after this. I'm really glad that the PS2 versions made her a permanent character, as the original PS1 version had her optional, and I'd much rather have her with us. In battle she can't use spells and mainly deals slash and strike damage, but her main utility, for me, was her support talent, which upgrades your accessories over time as you progress without having to spend lens on them, which honestly was the only way my accessories ever actually got upgraded. She was also really useful in the sections I used her for, but unfortunately my over-reliance on the Swordian Masters really pushed her and the others to the bench. Speaking of, Leon Magnus is the Master of Chaltier, the Swordian of Earth. Leon is absolutely the most complex and intriguing character here. The majority of the rest are a completely open book, with some probably incapable of withholding information about themselves. Leon is ice cold, keeping everyone at arm's length, considering he meets the party as he's arresting them and they're in his custody for the rest of the first arc, although he begins to open up around Calvalès. Stan gets petrified by a basilisk, which was a traumatic moment for me. If you know, you know. And Leon chases after Greybon, before realising he actually does care about Stan more than he thought, and goes back to hell. He's also got everything going on with Marion, the maid that lives with him and his father, Hugo, who is definitely a great father figure for him. Marion and Emilio's relationship is something that kept me intrigued throughout, and as it turns out, she was the bargaining chip that leads to the events in the second arc. Leon also gets seasick really easily, which personally I find hilarious. We seasick people need to stick together. In battle, Leon makes use of both earth and dark spells, since there's no dark dedicated character, and also has a lot of useful slash attacks. He also uses a dagger alongside his Chaltier, and he looks pretty cool, I must say. Next up is Filia Felice, a priestess from the Sterilized Temple who is petrified when Greybum steals the Eye of Adamoni. Initially she acts as an NPC accompanying the party, but after begging to fight even though she doesn't have a weapon, the next Swordian, Clemente, is found in the Radisral at the bottom of the ocean, and she transforms into the dedicated magic attacker of the party. She is the most empathetic member of the party, expressing remorse for not being able to stop Greybum at the beginning, and acting kind towards the other members of the party, even somehow managing to be civil with Kongman when he's being incredibly annoying. She's also secretly a psychopath, as can be seen in skits when she's cooking up formulas for her new bombs. There is a little subplot of Filia having feelings for Stan, which starts when he cheers her up just before the Radisral, but it's not overly developed until towards the end of the game, so it doesn't overtake her character, which is great. In battle, she uses offensive magic alongside her bombs and melee range, and she can use spells of every element, making her a force to be reckoned with, and so she never left my party unless the game absolutely made me. Which it did at times, and boy, I did not like those sections. Filia also gets the coolest section of the opening for herself, so that puts her much higher in my personal rankings. Next up is Woodrow Kelvin, also known as Gar Kelvin in the original PS1 Western release, but his name is Woodrow, so we will be calling him Woodrow. He shows up at the beginning of the game just after the events at the Draconis, but only sticks around for a little while, although he acts just shifty enough for you to figure out he probably can hear Dimlos, so he doesn't think that Stan is crazy. Well, maybe not completely crazy. He shows up later alongside Chelsea when the party returns to Fandaria. revealing that yes, he is the Swordian Master of Igdanos, the Swordian of Wind. He's also the rightful heir to the throne of Pandaria, but that's much less important. He's a serious man, as is becoming of the Regent, and fair play to him for doing all that while having a rabid 14-year-old at his ankles at all times. He truly is God's strongest soldier. Unfortunately, Igdanos is put out of action just before you get use of them, so they don't really have much of a dynamic. In battle, he uses both sword and bow skills, while also having access to wind elemental skills. Interestingly, his third blast caliber is unique, as if he uses it, then he'll revive the rest of the party if they're dead, and restore their health, before fainting himself, making it a good recovery technique while offering a little risk and reward if used otherwise. The rest of the characters are all non-masters, and honestly I have little experience with most of them in battle. Chelsea just because I didn't know how to fit her in, and Johnny and Cogman because I don't like them. Anyway, first up is Chelsea Torn, a girl from Pandaria who is literally walking around the Ice Age in a crop top. You are going to get pneumonia. She is obsessed with Woodrow to an insane degree, even at one point threatening Miri's life if she went against him in any way. She's largely not present for the majority of the first arc, and only rejoins alongside Woodrow when the party returns to Pandaria after going around the rest of the world. She's one of those designs that some might call over the top, but honestly I think the hair and the bow and everything helps tie together an image of her relative maturity at her age, considering she is an orphan living in the wilderness with her grandfather, who may or may not be related to her. We can never know. She's also prone to crying, but doesn't want others to know about it, as shown at the beginning of the game, but she will outwardly show emotion for others. Also, why does her portrait look like that? That's kind of scary. In battle, she exclusively uses bows, and does have access to one healing spell, although it needs to make direct contact with her target, and it will interrupt any spell casting, which in my opinion makes it not particularly viable, which alongside her relatively underwhelming attack prowess, maybe not use her too much. Next I'm talking about Johnny Sheeden, the wandering bard from Aquavale. He's also part of the royal family of Sheeden, but he doesn't care about that, so neither will I. I honestly do not know exactly what it is about him that I don't like. Maybe it's his voice? The way he talks? It's probably the way he's shredding on that mandolin. It's not meant to be played like that. He's a big fan of writing songs about every little thing that happens, which tends to annoy the rest of the party, so I'm glad we're all on the same page. His support talent can let him act as a dark bottle, so he's great if you want that, I suppose. Anyway, he mainly uses sonic arts in battle, which I barely ever saw until literally the final dungeon, which would have been handy fighting Tarazzi, but hey, hindsight is 2020. I just didn't like him. Maybe the vibes were wrong, I don't know. Screw it, we're talking about the secret character first. So, if you complete the arena in Neustadt, you can unlock a secret party member, Lilith Aileron. The fight against her is actually quite tough, especially after the onslaught beforehand. Unfortunately, once you get her, she may as well not exist. She shows up in a handful of skits and that's it. They could have at least let her stand off to the side in cutscenes, but unfortunately not. Thankfully her support talent enhances the food that your food sack produces, so she's incredibly useful to have around regardless. And finally, the man I hate, Mighty Kong Man. Honestly, I think the main reason I don't like him is because of his weird obsession with Philia. The rest of the time he's fine. He speaks up for the downtrodden and lower classes of Neustadt. He likes to win his matches with honesty and integrity, although he might be a little too obsessed with his title. And the people love him and chant his name whenever he's near. There is this random lady who hates him later in the game though, and honestly, I feel you lady. Me too. In battle, he can't use spells due to his non-master status, and mainly uses strike arts, but again, I didn't really use him until the final dungeon, so I don't have much personal experience. I'm sure he's great though, but I won't be finding out. Fun fact, he's actually the only main playable character that doesn't feature in the opening cutscene, which is probably due to his optional status in the original PS1 release, but then again, Chelsea couldn't be used beyond the very beginning of the game then, and she's still there, so yeah, it's kinda strange. If I had to rank the party members, I would have it like this. Lilith will be higher if she had any actual screen time, but this is how it has to be, I fear. At this stage, I'd love to talk a little bit about the music, but I'm afraid that what I'll be saying will be pretty repetitive. All of the music in this game is great. There are a couple of tracks where on first listen I wasn't overly impressed, but After going through the areas they're played in, I realised they all match the atmosphere and locale pretty well. The cathedrals and temple-like dungeons have this organ track that has this regal, holy feel to it. The world map theme reflects the current state of the world, with the first theme being more adventurous and lighthearted, and the second having a more serious tone due to the recent events. There's also this theme that plays during emotional scenes, like Miri and Dallas's reunion, which really helps the emotion of the scene come across. But most importantly, the battle music goes so hard. The normal battle theme, Burr Its Fangs, is great. It's not something that could ever get grading, and there's even a surprise attack variant that switches it up with the same tune arrangement but with a different sound, which keeps everything fresh, and as someone who appreciates as many battle tracks as possible, I really liked it. Although my absolute favourite battle theme has to be Relentless Assault, which plays against some bosses in the first arc, mainly Batista and Dallas Vincent. I know it sounds different, but I had a lot of trouble with these guys, and I think the energy in this track really helped get my blood pumping, making those 12 life bottles absolutely worth it. Oh yeah, of course, the opening theme is also really good when it's not being gutted for Western audiences. My personal favourite shots being Philia lifting Clemente to the sky, and Philia cleaning her glasses, as I am Philia's #1 fan. Okay, now back to the story. The second arc starts off really strongly. After a 3-month time skip, it's made very obvious that Leon is being blackmailed and made to do things he doesn't want. And this is the beginning of a trope that will run throughout the series, that of the traitor party member. Done well in some cases, such as here, and in others, not so much. Anyway, there's a new set of villains who are so obviously Hugo and the Oberon detectives we already met. And we get a really emotional sequence, where we find out Leon and Ruthie are brother and sister. Leon has to save us to save Marion, we beat him, and then he dies. He sacrifices himself to save the rest of the party, and accepts his fate with Chaltier. Stan is scrambling to get back down to him. Ruthie has gone into complete denial. It's an incredible scene that I honestly didn't expect at all. I thought we'd all be happy going into the finale, but it really adds some tension and leads into one of my favourite scenes in the game. Ruthie breaking down, trying to figure out her complicated feelings. It's amazingly written, and the voice acting is, again, completely on point. Unfortunately, as much as the increased stakes and introduction of otherworldly powers is great, and I do love the concept of Belkrant and the crust around the world, the actual execution of these ideas in a gameplay sense is a bit lacking for me. The plan moving forward involves the Swordian team travelling along the newly formed Outer Crust, moving to 7 different locations in order to deactivate the evil Arc Draconis, revive Ictanos, and disable the barrier around the final dungeon. The 7 dungeons are great in concept. One is dark, and almost every battle you enter will be a back or a pincer attack, since it's dark, so the party wouldn't have even seen the enemies coming, which I think is neat. The thing that lets it down, in my opinion, is the world map. It's just paths of dirt. There are no points of interest, there's just a couple of branching paths that lead to nothing, and the trek between some of these places is far too long. Once you unlock the teleports between them, it's not too bad, but it really shouldn't have reached the length that it did. The character moments that happen here are great too. You fight each of the Oberon executives. Baruch is fine, he just wants to reinvigorate his country, and he has this sick bug monster design, which I'm just finding out is a suit. I thought he had transformed into this creature through sheer willpower. Oh well. My favourite of these fights is by far the one with Irene. Stan had previously grown close to her, and she spited her ideals for a joining of all people, where there was no separation by class or race. I'm still unsure as to how she thought that obliterating the vast majority of the population would be the best way to do this. Anyway, after the absolute chaos that is her boss fight, we see the mirror of my earlier favourite scene. This time Ruthie is pulling Stan up from the brink, after watching Irene accept and embrace her own death after defeat. Also, Ictanos is alive. He's fine. He doesn't do much. Thankfully, the game decided to end this slightly lackluster section of the game with the hype cutscene of the Swordian Masters breaking the barrier around Belkrant. This is the stuff I live for, although I would have preferred if we got a battle cry from the other 3. This dungeon is not the final one, even though it's final dungeon coded. We couldn't possibly finish the game without Johnny, although I'll be real, I forgot he wasn't with us anymore. This leads into a sort of training arc / final world tour section, which I actually really liked. The magma cavern that houses the hyperbolic time chambers allows the game the traditional fire level it hadn't had as of yet. And the actual fight with human form Deimos was cool, although I would have liked to see the other human forms of the Saurians fight a little too. It kind of reminded me of the Super Silhouette section of Hardcatch Precure 2, which is also a good thing. Yeah, I got 2 Precure references in here. It's my video, I do what I want. The World Tour acts as a way to show the scope of the battle effort, getting every main town involved, and the party are given a moment to reflect before the final battle, resulting in some great character moments for Philia, Stan and Ruti. The actual final dungeon itself is massive, with several different environments and puzzles to get confused by. Most of them are fine. I like the part where you had to form 2 parties and step on various switches to open new paths, but this rising elevator annoyed me a lot, purely because the level geometry was really easy to get stuck on, and the timing was so tight this was almost always a death sentence. Also, these mirror enemies are cool. I do feel like the coffins holding the entire Aetherian population could have been looked at a little more, but I guess that's an idea that's fairly clear at its core anyway. The final boss here is insane. Mictran has 2 forms. The first you can clear without any problems going in blind. It went quite painlessly on my first attempt, but for the second form you absolutely need to prepare. The amount of ailments flying around and the pure amount of dark damage he does is insane. He's always teleporting around the place. My first attempt took me 25 minutes and even then I still failed, although it was a lot of fun, I have to say. Finally beating him was immensely satisfying. There's nothing better than finally overcoming a challenge you've been throwing yourself at for ages. Overall, I really enjoyed the story, although I think the second half was a little stronger, even though it was weaker in a gameplay sense. The first arc was necessary in order to build up the world correctly, letting the player learn about the different locales and their individual issues, and I like that this world tour was contextualized in the second arc as needed in order to awaken all of the Aeropolis structures. The character moments were great also, particularly those between Stan and Ruti, although Philia's moment with Stan before the final dungeon is another highlight, as well as Irene's final moments. And here are some random things I want to talk about, but they don't fit anywhere else. The tutorials are interactive, meaning if you know what you're doing, you can move through them really quickly. Thank God. There's a system where you can take requests from these traders who need you to supply various items to traders in another town, and they give you an advance of the reward up front. I think I did this like twice, but it's a cool system. Skits in this entry are called the emotional card system, and the characters all appear on these cards which can move and change expression, and it really helps express the emotions of the scene well, so the name kind of fits. The Saurians also have their human forms here, and thank God, because these are great designs. Also, everybody is so skinny. Look at those waists, my god. There's a guy in Janos who wiped his ass with his passport. I need him in prison. Before getting Clemente, Philia never acknowledged the other Saurians, although she did afterwards. Could she not hear them before? Did she just not care? Is she stupid? Morio Castle has a puzzle where you have to enter doors with animals on them in the order they appear in the Chinese zodiac. This seems really niche for a random dungeon puzzle, but I guess maybe that's more common knowledge than I thought. The Arch Draconis from the Greybun fight has the same sound effect as King Crimson. I have no further comment on this, I just thought it was cool. For the Irene fight, the last skit I watched was called Women Are Complicated, so this was on screen the entire time we explored the dungeon. I am sorry, women. In the final dungeon, there's a section where you have to dodge these roly spiky things, and here's me dodging one at the last second. Oh, that was close. That's what it's all about, folks. There's an alternate route through the game called Leon's Side, which takes place from, well, Leon's perspective. I only played a little bit of it, but from what I can tell, it's a slightly harder version of mostly the same events, with different scenes at times, although I imagine the real changes will come in the second arc when Leon leaves the group. Oh, speaking of, apparently in the original PS1 version, you have to fight a zombified version of Leon that begs for death before the final boss, which is not at all traumatizing. And finally, there's a minigame in the arena in the later stages of the game called Strange Shot, where you control Chelsea and shoot enemies approaching from both sides of the screen. It's pretty fun. Apparently Fantasia had something similar, but I never found it, so yeah. There's also a racing child, but we hate him. All things considered, I really enjoyed my time with this game. Every time I turned it off, I wanted to come back and play more. I loved the majority of the characters. I feel like they were fleshed out really well. Even the villains had motives that I felt made sense, even though they were obviously wrong. If I had to suggest some changes, I would say maybe give Lilith a little more screen time. I know she's the secret character, but a few skits surely wouldn't have been that difficult. And maybe moving the Aeropolis locations a little bit. Some of those were way too far from each other. And that was Tales of Destiny. I would honestly give this game an A. I really don't have that much to complain about that really matters. I would highly recommend giving this one a go if you can. Who knows, maybe Namco will re-release it or something. Although with their recent track record, maybe not. Thank you so much for your patience with this one. I have been really busy the last while, and as much as I've tried to get this one out, it unfortunately has taken 6 months, but hopefully now I'm back into the swing of things. As always, if you like this video, please like, leave a comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Which is probably going to be Tales of Eternia, let's be real.